personality. I know, right? Too bad it's the face made for radio, right? Okay, here we go. YouTube is on now. Get Vivian in the room. All right, we are ready to go then. So let me flip the camera back around. That's probably helpful. Okay, good morning to everybody. We are, to me, finally going to get to a place where the narrative turns a little bit in 1 Kings. We've had a lot of detail about the building of the temple and the palace and so on and so forth, and are just starting to scratch the surface on the narratives. And the narratives are really what are going to drive the story of 1st and 2nd Kings. They get much more exciting. And I don't know, for me, today's the day to get started with some of the excitement. So we'll do a little bit of review and see if there's anything really important that you want to bring up from the last time to help set the stage, and then we'll move forward. Anything you remember as being important? Especially if somebody else happened to not be here last week. What would you want to make sure they knew about the couple of chapters they missed? They were throwaways. You don't need to go back and read them again. They weren't that important. Is that what we're saying?
I'll give a shot.
Fair enough. All right. Hey, Louise. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll give it a shot. What I remember is we had discussions about where God really wants to be. You know, as we read through all the elaborate and the long time it took, and Solomon's building that, and he's getting hired people to do it, and behind it all is the question of how God wants to be worshipped and where. And you know, it's a fitting beginning as we move forward into the faith story, I think, to settle that question. And what was the other thing? Somebody must have something else. There were a couple of things in my mind about what we said, but they just flipped my mind now. Come on, folks. Wasn't there something really else? There was. Oh, well, everybody wants to get going.
Yeah, and that's fair. It wasn't terribly exciting. I mean, I think, Louise, you was probably for us spiritually the most important piece. And the relationship between Solomon, God, the people, and the reflection between all of that in the temple, I think is really good. And then the narrative switched over, and remember, just kind of for a brief chapter, Hiram is there, and they're doing these dealings about these cities around the Galilee and so on and so forth. And it really wasn't all that exciting, with the exception of, from a narrative perspective, it's setting Solomon up as filthy rich, right? Like he has stuff way beyond anything that he would need. And so we recalled that here's Solomon, who has slaves, chariots, horses, wealth, a marriage to Pharaoh's daughter, a palace that's bigger than the temple for God, and so on and so forth. He's empire building at this point. And so we just kind of noted that and said, okay, remember that there is always this undercurrent beyond the current that says Solomon's great and wonderful and God's chosen. There's this undercurrent that says, look at the corruption at the heart of the kings, the monarchy of Israel. So bear that in mind as we move forward. And we'll just move forward. We've got a good narrative to start off today. Actually, I think the next 3 chapters are just fun. Okay. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Zoom in a little more. All right. When the Queen of Sheba heard the fame of Solomon, fame due to the name of Yahweh, she came to test him with hard questions. He came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold, precious stones. When she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba had observed all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, with their clothing, his valets, his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of Yahweh, there was no more spirit in her, which is a terrible translation. But we'll come back to that maybe in a minute. So she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your accomplishments and your wisdom, but I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. Not even half had been told me. Your wisdom and your prosperity far surpass the report that I heard. Happy are your wives, happy are your servants who continually attend you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be Yahweh your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king to execute justice and righteousness. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, a great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again did spices come in such quantity as that which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. We'll stop there for just a second, just because we should talk about who she is and what's going on here for a second before we go too much farther. Who's the Queen of Sheba? Where's Sheba? Yeah, she's got a ton of money, whatever's going on, and she's clearly brought it to bear for some purpose. Have you ever heard of her before? Have you heard of the title? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What have you heard? It's super rich.
Super rich.
So made demands on Solomon, and we'll see a little bit more of their unfolding relationship as we go forward. She comes, though, not with demands. She comes first with riddles, which is really interesting. And there's a lot that we can say about this. I mean, from a very nerdy perspective, the language that's used here, it's a borrow word that doesn't appear prior to the 6th century. And so this is one of those places where we can kind of zero in on a date for when this was composed, or at least in its final form. So she comes with riddles to test the wisdom of Solomon. That's at least one motive. She probably has some other motives too. Catherine and then Scott.
Yeah, I was just I couldn't remember the verse in Matthew, so I just looked it up about Queen of the South will rise up, and so like is she? I know Sheba's here and Sheba's there, but like, are there other things in the text that provide color, or is it just referring back to this passage when it says
so
she'll rise up?
There's not as much as we would like to have in the text, but there are some legends. Is that Matthew chapter 11?
It's 12, verse 42.
Okay. There's a parallel in Luke also. Yeah, here we go. Here's the verse. Let me pull it up for you. I pulled it up for me and not you all. Sorry. Here we go. The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to listen to the wisdom of Solomon, and see something greater than Solomon is here. And that's a fascinating set of passages, but the Queen of the South is understood to be the Queen of Sheba. There are a couple of different names that end up getting associated with this queen. Queen of the South is one. Where Sheba is a big question. And we should talk about that a little bit, but at the very least, it's south and it's far is the language that we get from the Bible. She has a couple of other names. Bilquis is one that even gets sort of deified in some cases. So if you were to look up Bilqis, you would see almost exactly the association there. But yeah, it's, to me, I think it's really interesting that there's this reference in both Matthew and Luke for sure. So she grows in legend. I'll say that, and we would have to go to the Talmud and an Ethiopian Jewish legend and all sorts of other legends to pick up all the pieces. She appears in various Arabic scriptures, but I think specifically in the Quran, in the Scripture of Islam. Scott Simcoe.
Yeah, just from my notes, it says that Sheba location is unknown, but possibly to be identified with Saba, the home of the Sabaeans,
Yes.
southwest part of the Arabian Peninsula, which was precisely the area which Solomon was anxious to establish trading relationships. And it says the queen's hard questions are not described in detail, but they might have been riddles of the sort that was the basis of Samson's contest with the Philippines.
Good.
I'm sorry, Philistines. The ability to solve riddles was the mark of a wise person.
Yeah.
But I found it strange that in this male-dominated society that you've got this very powerful woman, queen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's extraordinary. So that's really that's more interesting almost than some of the other stuff. Oh, let's touch on the geography a little bit, and then I'll come back to the other piece, which is that she is this powerful ruler. Let's see, what do we do normally? Google Maps, right? Okay, so if you didn't hear Scott, one of the things he said is that she came from Saba, where the Sabaeans are from, and the S and the SH sound generally are the same character in most ancient Near Eastern languages. So Shaba, Saba, etc. These are kind of the same things. Okay, so we have the Arabian Desert, and somewhere down here in what would currently be called Yemen, we have Saba. The Sabaeans lived here, but specifically the Yemenite Sabaeans. There are other Sabaeans who are just across the Red Sea here in Ethiopia. And so we end up with two really strong streams of narrative related to who the Queen of Sheba is. One suggests that she is an African queen that comes out of Ethiopia, and the other suggests that she is a Yemenite queen that comes out of south of the Arabian Desert. In both cases, she's probably linked to the same ethnic group. And both of them have very, very strong women who lead. I mean, it's not exclusive to them or anything like that, but in both cases, they have very specific words that they used for women who are in the role of queen functionally. And she's one of them. So she commands a great deal, has a ton of wealth for whatever that might mean. These are both tribal groups that are, well, gosh, almost everything back then's a tribal group in some of these places that don't have very, very, very pronounced kingdoms. But she probably has the kind of chieftain role over multiple tribes. Would be a way of understanding a little bit of how probably she amassed such wealth and power, that it's not so much that she's just like, she's the chieftain, so to speak, of an individual group, but probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in various tribes that consider her their ruler of sorts. So that's really, yeah, that's good. But this is the area that we're dealing with. And in both cases, and this is the important part that I think Scott was mentioning, in both cases, way up here is where you have Solomon reigning. Solomon has a marriage with the daughter of Pharaoh in Egypt. He's got a great alliance going with the people in Lebanon. Oh, you know what? Let me flip over to a satellite map. You can sort of see how vast the deserts are around here. He's got a great relationship with the people in this green spot, right? He's got a great relationship with people in this green spot up here. He's got a big desert over here, a big desert over here. And then he's got this body of water, which is a great trade route. And he has now a relationship either with somebody in the west side in this big green spot, or on the east side in the only area around this entire stretch that's going to be populated that happens to be on the coastline here. And remember that he's just gotten this big fleet. So talk about empire building, at least in terms of alliances. The Queen of Sheba represents to him, as Scott said, a real great possibility for opening trade routes, amassing wealth, and having an alliance with his southern neighbors. Good there. Anything else? Yeah, Jim, 1 second. All right, you go right ahead.
There's no historical evidence, okay, that she actually existed.
Yeah, it's challenging.
Number one. And number two, they don't give her a name in the
Mhm.
Bible. They just refer to her as the Queen of Sheba.
Yes.
So some biblical scholars believe this is a made-up story that she actually came to visit him,
Yes.
okay, to establish his bona fides.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Good. So, hopefully you all heard that. Okay. It's really, really difficult to be able to say that she existed, right? And like so many other characters in this stretch of the Bible, especially since she's given a title only and not a name. Now, there are some who think that there was a particular name, and there are legends that get woven in, but it makes sense given some of our transmission issues, right? If we think that properly, we're looking at the 6th century when this narrative is written, then they're reporting something that happened at least 300 years earlier, if not 400, probably 400 years earlier. And yeah, they need to set Solomon up. How does Solomon get the wealth? How is Solomon building an empire, and so on and so forth, and to build his character. And that might not be positive. Remember that might be to malign his character at some level. And so this is a figure that they can use in the same way that Pharaoh, sometimes it's just a title. Now we'll get some people that stand in that place where we get some names that help us. But in other cases, it's just Pharaoh. Which Pharaoh? I don't know. Which dynasty, if there's even a dynasty of pharaohs at this point, I don't know. All that stuff gets really, really, really tricky. And it's probably in part because the title or the titular role of the person is more important than the name of the person as it gets passed down. And then you end up with people trying to recreate the story and they stick to the title. And yeah, probably for something of propagandish purposes, though it's, again, like, is it to support Solomon or not? That's a good question. So yeah, very good. Now, the one thing I'll say is that while it's impossible to pinpoint who she is, there's very little doubt that a Queen of Sheba existed, and while it's conjecture, the chance that there was a Queen of Sheba who was a consort to Solomon seems very, very likely also, for a lot of different reasons, and was not in doubt very much. Though again, all these things are in doubt when we're in the ancient Near East. Was there a Solomon? Who knows? But we think so. Luis.
I think we can guess that perhaps the Queen of Sheba came to see him and to check out his wealth and status because she might have been interested in alliances herself.
Right, she's trapped down there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was interested and he was powerful. Why wouldn't she be interested too to check him out? So
yes, very good, right. So it's not at all one-sided here. Good. Okay, anything else? All right, that helps us kind of bridge the gap a little bit. Oh, I did mention that there was one bad translation thing, and then I see Hutch.
oh
Bad
yeah,
translation. He sees all this wonderful stuff, and he answers all of her riddles, and she doesn't have any spirit left in her. It's just awful. So those of you who were in one of especially the traditional services last week, I know Tom talked about this. What's the word for spirit in Hebrew? Anybody remember?
Ruah? No.
Ruach. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
ruach.
good.
Yeah.
Well done, Luis. Ruach. What's the word for wind in Hebrew, or air, or breath?
Ruah.
Ruach. So she probably is breathless, would be a really normal translation to put in there that would just explain, like, this is also wonderful. She's breathless. But instead, they decided to go this extra metaphysical route that she sees all this stuff and her spirit escapes her body. It just makes, to me,
My
it
Jerusalem
makes
Bible
no sense.
says it left her breathless.
Oh, good. That's so much better. We'll wag our finger at the New Revised Standard people for a minute. That's just, I don't know. From my perspective, that's awful. It is not, it's the Occam's razor thing. It applies sometimes to biblical translation also. Okay, Hutch. Hutch, you're muted.
It's interesting that the discussions sort of points that she's there fascinated by his power, his wisdom, his wealth, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in verse 9, she makes a very profound theologic statement here. I think she gets it, and at least in what she says. It clearly states that Solomon is on the throne by the grace of God. Solomon is not a self-made man. God put him there. And secondly, she points out that this covenantal relationship of Israel and Yahweh, Yahweh's everlasting love for Israel. And finally, she states another true element. The real reason that Solomon is there on the throne is he's to justly administer law and justice.
Good.
So she, in theologic terms, sums up why Solomon's there in the first place and what he's supposed to do.
Very good. Yeah, I like that. And again, that might also be a setup to see what actually happens versus what he's supposed to do. But yeah, very, very good. Something within this also just really helps to talk about the way that God's grandeur is on display here and God's purposes. That's extremely helpful. Jacqueline, did you have your hand up also? You're muted. Sorry.
When you say breathless, was she breathless because of the trip or breathless because of seeing Solomon?
Yeah. The experience of being there makes her so astonished is the implication that she's just it's breathtaking, right? It's all breathtaking.
Okay. Well, how did she get to the New Testament? Because there were many, many years between the Old and the New Testament. How did she get there?
Good. And I'm not an expert on this, so I'll do my best. Not that I'm an expert on anything, but I'll do my best. So starting in the 6th century, there's really kind of an explosion of legends that grow around the Queen of Sheba, and all sorts of stuff is happening in the ancient Near East, in Northern Africa, in the Arab Peninsula. It would be impossible for me to even begin to recall all that's happening there over the 1,000 years from Solomon to Jesus. But in the set of legends that grows there and whatnot, one thing that starts to really have a role is that Jewish people end up in Ethiopia and remain there to this day. And there's all sorts of legends even about how that happens. So historically speaking, one of the things that's most likely is that during the Babylonian conquest and captivity and the diaspora that follows, some Jewish people some Israelites end up in Ethiopia settling. But from a legend perspective, one of the things that happens is that as they put down their roots there, they begin to tell the story of how they landed there, and they don't say we were. And again, this is a lens of skepticism, so they could be right, but they don't tell the story of how, because Babylon destroyed Israel, we fled, and this is where we landed. Instead, they tell the story that when Solomon was with the Queen of Sheba, they had children, and among these children was a set of children, one named David in particular. And David was anointed by Zadok the priest to be a priest himself. And he also stole the Ark of the Covenant. And so they fled and got on their ships to go to Ethiopia, where they brought the Ark of the Covenant, and they brought the Jewish rites and rituals, and retained a copy of the temple, basically, or built a copy of the temple. And this is an extraordinary thing. And there's a very, very, very large Jewish population in Africa to this day that draws its roots from this set of stories. So all that to say is that in the flow back and forth of legendary material, as well as very well established Judaism in North Africa, especially in Ethiopia and along the Horn there in Somalia, and the flow back up into the Arabian Peninsula and into the Levant, all this stuff grows in extraordinary ways, and she becomes not only and her descendants after her, not only this great figure of power and wealth, but she kind of becomes deified. And so, you know, the language there of how she's going to rise up at the end and stand in judgment is, it's not about her as much as it might be in some other cases about her, but at the same time, you can see that there's some material there that establishes that she's a pretty impressive character by that point. And again,
Okay.
that's probably pushing the limit of what I could reflect back on today. But I know for sure if you were to do a look at the Queen of Sheba in Ethiopian history or or the relationship between the Queen of Sheba and Ethiopian Jews in particular, or if you were to look at the Queen of Sheba as a deified figure, the rabbit hole is deep for sure. And again, you know, if you're interested, look at it in Islam as well. Look at it in the Talmud. That's the Babylonian extracurricular material that's beyond the Hebrew scriptures. It's pretty impressive. She becomes a major figure. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. Just as a side note, let's see if I can pull up something real quick for us, actually. Yeah, good. So there's a collection of like Wikipedia pages and whatnot on the history of Jews in Ethiopia. I'm almost positive there's a great, let's see, Jewish music Ethiopia. I'm looking for, there's a great collection of sacred music from the Jews of Ethiopia that it's worth looking at sometime. That's a great topic. I wish I had more to to say other than there's a lot to look at there. It's a lot of fun. Andy.
So was the culture such and her power such that she could go to Solomon
Would
and
you heat
demand
up
him
this
to make
coffee
him
for me?
his wife?
I missed that last part, Andy. I'm sorry. Andy, will you say that one more time?
Was the cultural aspects and the power of the Queen of Sheba, could she go to Solomon and say, hey, you have to make me your wife? You mentioned the children.
Yeah, no, she couldn't make the demand, but she could present a pretty good case for their partnership in that way. So just for me, I think the thing to take a look at is this is a political partnership and alliance. She might have been beautiful and all sorts of other stuff. Although, again, here's where some of the tricky stuff comes in, where she's deified. There's also a legend, if I recall, that, and this comes from the Talmud in particular, if I recall, that she's not just a human, that she's, it's all coming back. Good. All right. So in Islam, she's not just a human. She's half human, half jinn, right? And so Solomon uncovers that she has features that are Jinn, and is astonished by them, but not afraid of them exactly, which is kind of cool. And then, yeah, in the Talmud, they touch on the same kind of topic, which is interesting. So anyway, in any case, she's powerful, but and maybe even a demigod of some sort, but can't compel. So instead, it's a political alliance alongside probably a pretty significant romance. That's the guess. We'll let the story unfold and judge from that perspective. All right. Oh, yeah. So the thing that we probably want to tag is in the ancient Near Eastern world, we think of patriarchy, and we think of there is no chance for powerful women, and they're around all the time. Not nearly as much as powerful men's stories are reported, and we don't have enough about her, unfortunately. But she comes to him as an equal. She does not. She comes to him as the aggressor to move into this political alliance, which is pretty. It's pretty cool to think about. Pretty cool to think about. Judy, did you have something also?
I'm beginning to think that people that were called women or queens of that era, strike me possibly as transgenders. These are men who can work as we know now, can be very female. And it makes sense that that person would have been able to go up to Solomon as a woman and avoid having to bring all their, chariots and soldiers and work wily ways. Because as you said, it's a political alliance. Mm-hmm. So he's not looking at her as a woman, but as a political. Okay. And all of this chat about her strength and it strikes me there's some other, I don't doubt that a person like that existed.
Sure.
And I'm wondering the real background.
Yeah, it's certainly possible to consider that. However, there are enough powerful women from Nefertiti to the Queen of Sheba that I don't think we need.
They don't have to be transgender.
Yeah, I don't think we need to stretch it farther than she's just a powerful woman. But we could. There's to move into the role of conjecture and talk about her as transcending, at the very least, the expectations of what a woman was at the time. That can potentially be helpful. Catherine, I see your hand coming up.
Yeah, I was just going to offer, on that particular instance, I think it's interesting because we don't have any context here to think that, but there are other places in scripture where we do, right? So that's just something to mention. But I just wanted to, I'm looking at Womanist Midrash by Will Gaffney, and she talks about how the book of Kings could be translated Queens and Kings because, and you tell me, I don't know my Hebrew, but Malachim is a common plural that is more about being a monarch than necessarily being a king. So, this is not the only instance we have of a female royal person in Kings, right?
Yeah, for sure. Good. So let's dig on that for just a second. So Malachim, Melech is king, and that is gendered, and just remember grammatical gender is irrelevant in most ways, but not always. Sometimes this is an example of Melech is specifically male monarch. Melkat, I can't remember. Melkat is queen. Same, MLK, same exact 3 letters that make the root word with a feminine ending, so grammatically speaking, feminine. When you make a plural, you cannot make a plural that has a masculine or a feminine or both. And if you're speaking of kings and queens, you would have to use, grammatically speaking, the masculine plural, Melachim. And so it renders it in such a way that most people historically have read it as masculine plural without any nuance. But very much there are all sorts of powerful women including the Queen of Sheba, that we could read the Book of Kings as being something different. The only, the question at that point is, what's the book about? And so why does it get rendered Melachim? And I don't think it's primarily about, or even secondarily about the queens. I think it's very much about the kings, but not in a positive way. And that's the other thing that we lose, is that it's the Book of Kings because they are to blame, not because they're wonderful, or at least from my perspective. That's how I read Kings. And so if I were a queen, I wouldn't want to be associated.
A final thought on Queen of Sheba. This may be a generational thing, but I can remember maybe high school or college age people using the statement, "Who do you think you are, the Queen of Sheba?"
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody's heard that, but I heard it a lot in those years. And so you asked us what we knew about the Queen of Sheba, and I didn't really know anything. But now that came back, and that's a symbol of power, authority, and kind of chutzpah,
Yes, good.
Like, who do you think you are, Queen of Sheba? So I kind of liked her as a symbol or a type when I was younger, because I thought it was kind of cool that she could command such attention.
Yeah.
But I'm going to Google her, and I'll come back with some information.
Good, yeah. Y'all Google her, and you'll be reading for days, I'm sure. But that's wonderful. That really helps us to understand as a caricature who she is. But that caricature ends up being right in the case of how she plays out in this. She is a powerful woman who has command, right? All right, let's push along in the text. That's all very good. Let me find the text. That's not there. Okay, got it. All right, we'll definitely read to the end of this chapter and then maybe pause for a second longer. Verse 11, that's where we were. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which carried gold from Ophir, we don't know where that is. There's a lot of conjecture, but it's a place where gold comes from, and we do know that historically. Brought from Ophir a great quantity of almug wood and precious stones. From the almug wood, the king made supports for the house of Yahweh, and for the king's house, lyres also, harps for the singers. No such almug wood has come or been seen to this day. Meanwhile, King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba every desire that she expressed, as well as what he gave her out of Solomon's royal bounty. Then she returned to her own land with her servants. The weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents. That is a lot, right? Besides that which came from traders in the business of the merchants, and from the kings of Arabia and the governors of the land. And there's another example. The kings of Arabia, the Queen of Sheba should probably be counted in that group. Kings and queens would be probably a more accurate rendering. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold, 600 shekels of gold went into each large shield. He made 300 shields of beaten gold, 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a great ivory throne, overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps. The top of the throne was rounded in the back, and on each side of the seat were armrests, 2 lions standing beside the armrest. While 12 lions were standing, 1 on each end of a step on the 6 steps. Nothing like it was ever made in any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold. All the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. Too much gold flown around for silver. For the king had a fleet of ships at Tarshish at sea. You probably recognize the land of Tarshish or Tarshish. With the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the fleet of ships at Tarshish or Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. These are the bona fides, right? We have established that now. The whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought a present, objects of silver and gold, garments, weaponry, spices, horses, mules, so much year by year. Solomon gathered together chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he stationed in the chariot cities with the king in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedars as numerous as the sycamores of the Shephelah. Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kew, and the king's traders received them from Kew at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. So through the king's traders, they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Aram. Plenty of interesting stuff there, probably nothing of tremendous significance. Anything that you want to make sure we see? And I say nothing of significance. I should say nothing of significance beyond what we've already named, which is that Solomon is deep in the process of building something of an empire. Hutch?
But I sense as we read this that something's wrong here.
Good.
God intended Israel to be a light to the nations. And indeed, in verse 24, the whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom of God. But it seems like something's missing here. They're coming to Israel to hear Solomon and just showing up with tons of booty, which manufactures more stuff that I don't quite see Israel being the light that God called it to be.
Yep. Yeah, good. Yeah, this is not about Yahweh necessarily, or it could be, but there's something of a wasted opportunity that's happening already. We talk about this in Christianity about Constantine becoming the Christian emperor, and you think, oh, this could be a really good thing. The Roman Empire converted to Christianity, the emperor converted to Christianity. This could be God's moment to truly like bless the world. Nah. Then we start looking at what imperial Christianity becomes, and it's not. It was a wasted opportunity in that sense, at the very least. And so, yeah, with Solomon here, is Solomon thus far anyway? Is Solomon on track to set Israel up as a light to the nations, to bless all the peoples as God had promised to do through the descendants of Abraham? I don't know, or I do know, but we'll suspend judgment for a minute. How about that? But yeah, I think to say something fishy is already happening is a really good thing in chapter 10 to say.
You know, you can see how and why the promise of a savior coming as a king with wealth and power was being embedded. If you just look here, there was just that one line that Hutch mentioned about they came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and they just got, looking at all that he had, all of the riches, and so they're kind of going off the track here already, or it's one of many areas where the wealth. Look at all the stuff we read through about the temple.
Yep.
And I think God's desire is, like you went back to the earlier covenant, that the Israelites be a blessing to all, it was something like all the families of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you be a blessing when you're just showing off your riches?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. The priorities are maybe a little skewed. And
are we not a little guilty of that kind of stuff living in Ponte Vedra? And I'm not making a judgment of anybody but myself there.
Yeah. Even, just again, we talked about this a little bit in terms of our own house for God here, right? That sometimes we become really prideful of how beautiful this church is. And I'm definitely guilty of that. It's a beautiful church with incredible facilities and so on and so forth. But it's easy to get the priorities shifted in such a way that we lose sight of the mission of God in this place and start thinking about the place as the mission. And as Catherine has often noted for us, like place has such an important spiritual role But there is this tremendous, I don't want to say gray area because that doesn't quite seem right. There's this large space, spiritually speaking, where now I don't want to use space there either. There's this large area, spiritually speaking, where we can probably do some parabolic and paradoxical thinking about our priorities as it relates to building and displays of God's glory. It's a conversation the church has had for 2,000 years. So it's good for us to have it.
I think it applies more to individuals than churches, because I can see, especially through Catherine's ministry, that the places and spaces of Christ Church are being used for the well-being and the spiritual development of families of the world, as many as we can get in the door, So, but I do think that individuals have to ask that same question. Is my space and whatever amount of wealth I have, I'm not going to condemn it, but I'm going to say, how is it being used?
Yeah.
As a welcoming place, as a protective place. Do I go out from the safety of my little, world and do something that will enrich the families of the world? That's what I meant about human, individuals' response to this kind of question. Were they the only ones that were misdirected to think that wealth was the big deal?
Yeah,
or
sure.
do we also share in that when, even though we have wealth, we don't use it for the betterment of others?
Good. And if we do, then do we use it as much as we could or ought to? Right. So it's a fundamental question of stewardship. Do we understand that this is not actually mine, but this is God's, and am I using it for the purposes that God intended? And yeah, it is the same question, whether it's an individual or a body or the church or whatever. It's very much the place to consider. In any given place, am I using this, understanding that I am a steward of it for God's purposes? Well, gosh, there's a lot here. So let's see, Catherine, in a secular age, we are building our homes as tiny little temples for ourselves, sure, to ourselves sometimes, and in other cases, to other things. But yes, in a secular age, and those of you who aren't familiar with that language, Charles Taylor wrote a massive book describing the evolution of secularism functionally. It's so far beyond that as well, and a lot has been discussed about how we live in a phase of secularism that we might call a secular age. And so we have certain deep longings and desires and so on and so forth within us that draw us to behave in certain ways. And in a secular age, they come out, they manifest very, very differently than they have in previous ages. And there's, again, here's a place where with 8 minutes, there's no way we can go much farther than that. But if that is interesting to you, let's talk about that more for sure as a church. And yes, to consider that the church or the temple, these played a certain kind of role in society that by and large, people don't want or need anymore, or at least they don't think they do. And so something is happening with our desire for ritual in a secular age. Something's happening with our desire for sacred space in a secular age, right? And how is that coming back out? Those are great questions. Judy, did you have your hand?
I was just kind of going back to the Solomon story where if he indeed represented his faith in such a way, the riches are very much just an adjunct to his faith, and they had no relation. In other words, you can look at it as no relationship between the two, unless you want to be judgmental.
I don't know you have to say the word judgmental about that, but I would say that as a spiritual leader, I would say that we cannot look at it as if there's no relationship between the two.
Okay.
That there's a relationship between our faith and everything. Otherwise, something is, was it the transitive property, right? Like
Well,
there's something between our relationship from it to literally anything, our family relationships, our wealth, our activity in the world. And if there's not a thing flowing that direction, there's a reciprocal. So there's a relationship diminishing our faith potentially.
right, but I'm thinking about Solomon, which came first, his faith
Good.
or his riches?
Yes, good.
And so that's why I'm saying for anybody who has acquired something,
Yes.
which came first, the faith or the riches?
Good, good. So which came first? And in and of themselves, there's a value neutral relationship. It's not, it is not necessary to say, oh, Solomon had great wealth, that's a bad thing. But instead to begin to examine the ethics that are at play here, the practice of his faith and so on and so forth. And it even, I mean, it comes out in the text. So we'll uncover more and more as we go along in the text. But you know, the language, like, unless Yahweh builds this house is irrelevant, right? But here's Solomon, like, working really, really, really hard to gain more wealth. Is it for Yahweh's house? Is it for his own ego? These are all, this is very early in his story to ask these questions, but we'll see it play out. And they're really great questions for us to begin to universalize and draw out. This isn't just about Solomon, right? So, you know, why is Solomon establishing relationships with Q? Q is more than likely, Q is somewhere in like Turkey. Why is he going that far north? Is it for Yahweh? Is it for him? Which came first? Which came second? Which came third? And where is he now? These are all, this is great exploration. Landon.
Next one will tell us exactly where he is.
Yes, so, just let the story tell itself, and we'll see.
I mean, and not to go down this rabbit hole too much farther, but I'm just thinking of like prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
Here, and I mean, I can see like Solomon's mindset as like, I am faithful, good things are happening, wealth is coming, I am doing something right. I think it's easy for like human nature to get into that. Yep. And to kind of lose sight of faith. I think it was like Hutch was saying earlier, is like it's the sense that something is amiss. Yeah. Kind of in there, but that's just kind of what this kind of reminds me of.
That's great. That's great. It's really, that's great, right? So we have movement toward idolatry that can happen at any time with any of this conversation around wealth or power or fame. These things can move us toward idolatry quickly. In the ancient Israelite cycle of narrative, though, too, we also have an almost guarantee that anytime anybody rises to the top, some stuff's about to go down, right? Like, think about Judges when we had it on these cycles that happen so much more frequently, right? The people would fall into some sort of complacency in which they thought, oh, we don't really need Yahweh anymore. We're doing fine. Oh, and hey, check it out. A relationship with our neighbor in this way or that way would look really good. Maybe we'll get some more wealth for ourselves, or maybe we'll enter into alliance or whatever. But idolatry, syncretism, this sort of stuff starts to happen. So stuff starts to fall apart until they need God again, right? And what happens as we move from Judges into the cycle of the monarchy is that it takes longer in some cases for the other shoe to drop, right? That's okay. Don't forget the cycle, though, right? Prosperity gospel is not biblical, and instead we get to see what happens with it in the biblical term or sense. Okay, all right. Speaking of which, we have 2 minutes. Let's fulfill the prophecy for a second. Let's see. Oh, and remember that Deuteronomy said that Solomon, the king, shouldn't have horses, right? So he's in an international horse trade now, in spite of the explicit warnings not to do that. Watch out. Okay, we'll just read this first paragraph of chapter 11. King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the Israelites, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for they will surely incline your heart to follow their gods. Foreshadowing. Solomon clung to these in love. Among his wives were 700 princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not true to Yahweh his God, as was the heart of his father David. Yeah, right. I mean, come on. But here we go. We'll scrub David up a little bit for this. Solomon followed Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not completely follow the Lord as his father David had done. Then Solomon built a high place. This is like a temple for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. He did the same for all his foreign wives who offered incense and sacrificed to their gods. So we didn't have to turn far.
No.
Solomon's in trouble. The Israelites are in trouble, right? Because this is collective judgment, collective morality. Whatever came first, something got off. In the same way that you think about Moses and Aaron, right? Aaron wasn't far off, but he was far off enough. Because once you go so far, if you're only a degree off, you can end up really far from your destination if you keep walking. And so Solomon has done this. We have telescoping happening, right? Where Solomon was not a very old man when he starts to reign. We don't know what happens in terms of his life when the Queen of Sheba arrives. We don't know where he is. Maybe he's 25, who knows? By the time we get to this, he's a very old man. And so this takes place over decades, probably. And we should probably see that as an evolution rather than just like this sudden turn. It's not a flip a page and it's there, but instead this kind of evolving character in Solomon. But like we all said, there was something wrong that we could see at the beginning, right? With all his wisdom, he's very much like Adam and Eve, right? All the wisdom of the fruit in the tree that's in the middle of the garden, and not enough wisdom to avoid turning their hearts away from God. It's a mess. It's a mess. So here we are. It might be fun for you as homework to go and do some, not just brief research, especially using something like BibleOdyssey.org. Put that in there. It's a good resource because it comes from the Society of Biblical Literature. I feel like I'm spelling Odyssey wrong there. I'm sorry if I am. Bible Odyssey. No, that's right. Okay. So look up these gods. That was what I was going to say. Is go take a look at Molech. Go take a look at Chemosh. Read a little bit about these. Your Bibles may have some decent material in there. There's also a lot of legendary material that makes its way into our Bible commentary sometimes, so it's fun to lift it out in other ways. But in short, you'll probably find that this is not just casual idolatry or syncretism. So pay attention. I don't know. We'll pick back up there next week when we come back together. We went down a great rabbit hole today, I'll say. I thought we were going to do 3 chapters today. We did 1. But I think we did well. I think we did really well. Jane, did you just have your hand up? Okay. We'll say our prayers and get y'all out of here. Oh, and I will say goodbye to the YouTube crowd. See you all later, YouTube crowd. If you would like to join in the Zoom conversation and be able to go down the rabbit hole with us instead of as a passive passenger in our journeys down these rabbit holes, reach out. We'll be happy to have you in the class, give you the Zoom link, or you can come and sit in the dining room with us too.